Pack your desk, you're absolutely useless. Those words landed like a slap across the face. Kevin Brandt, my supervisor at the downtown branch of Holloway and Pierce Financial Group, said it loud enough for the entire open floor to hear. 23 people. Every single one of them stopped typing, stopped talking on the phone, stopped breathing, it felt like. And then came the smirks. Little grins spreading across faces like a disease. A few people exchanged glances. One woman in the back, Tanya, actually covered her mouth to hide a laugh. Kevin stood there with his arms crossed, chest puffed out, wearing this smug expression like he just won an award for being the biggest man in the room. I was standing at my desk, holding a stack of audit reports I'd spent the last 72 hours preparing. My hands were shaking. Not from fear. From something deeper. Something that had been building inside me for 11 months. And then the glass door to the main entrance swung open. A man walked in wearing a tailored navy suit, silver cufflinks, and an energy that shifted the entire atmosphere of the room before he even said a word. He scanned the office, spotted me, and smiled. "Honey," he said, walking straight toward me, "did you finish auditing this branch yet?" The room went completely dead silent. Kevin's smirk vanished like someone had ripped it right off his face. His arms dropped to his sides. Tanya's hand fell from her mouth. Every single person in that office froze in place. Because the man who just called me honey, the man standing right next to me with his hand on the small of my back, was Jonathan Mercer, the majority shareholder of Holloway and Pierce Financial Group, the man whose signature was on every paycheck in that building. My husband. Before going further, this channel shares stories of resilience, justice, and the moments that change everything. If that sounds like something worth following, the subscribe button is right there. My name is Denise Caldwell Mercer. I'm 41 years old, born and raised in Beaumont, Texas. My mother was a school teacher. My father drove long-haul trucks for 31 years until his knees gave out. I grew up in a house where hard work wasn't a philosophy. It was oxygen. You didn't talk about grinding, you just did it. My mother graded papers at the kitchen table until midnight. My father left before sunrise and came back after dark. That was life. I met Jonathan at a conference in Chicago. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't the loudest person in the room. He was standing by the window at the reception, reading something on his phone, completely disinterested in the networking circus happening around him. I walked over because he was standing next to the only open outlet and my phone was at 4%. We started talking. He told me he was in finance. I told him I was in accounting. We talked for 3 hours. He never once mentioned that he was the majority shareholder of a multi-billion-dollar financial group. I found that out 6 weeks later when I Googled the company name on his business card out of curiosity. By then I was already falling for him. Not for his money, for the way he listened, for the way he remembered everything I said, for the way he treated the waiter at our first dinner with the same respect he'd shown the CEO he'd had lunch with that afternoon. We got married 2 years later. Small ceremony, Beaumont, my mother's backyard. Jonathan wore cowboy boots with his suit because my father told him that's what real men wear in Texas. My father cried during the vows. Only time I ever saw that man's eyes water. After the wedding, Jonathan asked me what I wanted to do. Not what I wanted to buy, not where I wanted to travel, what I wanted to do. And I told him the truth. I wanted to work. Not because I needed to. Because I needed to. There's a difference. Working wasn't about money for me. It was about identity. It was about proving to that little girl from Beaumont who used to do math problems for fun at the kitchen table that she was worth something beyond what anyone else decided. Jonathan understood. He always understood. But here's where things got complicated. Holloway and Pierce had been expanding aggressively. 47 branches across 12 states. And Jonathan had been getting reports that something was off at the downtown Chicago branch. Numbers weren't adding up. Client complaints were rising. Employee turnover was through the roof. 3 auditors had already been sent to that branch over the past 2 years, and all 3 had come back with clean reports. But Jonathan's instincts told him something was wrong. So we came up with a plan. I would go in as a regular employee, a mid-level financial analyst. No one would know who I was. No one would know about my connection to Jonathan. I would use my maiden name, Denise Caldwell, and I would spend as long as necessary embedded in that branch, working from the inside, watching, listening, auditing everything I could get my hands on. It was risky. It meant living a double life. It meant enduring whatever culture existed in that office without the shield of my real identity. Jonathan didn't love the idea. He worried about me. But he also knew I was the best person for the job, not because I was his wife, because I was the most qualified auditor he'd ever met. His words, not mine. I walked into the downtown branch of Holloway and Pierce on a Monday morning in January. The building was a tall glass tower on Michigan Avenue, impressive from the outside. But the second I stepped off the elevator onto the 14th floor, I could feel it. Something was wrong. The energy was heavy. People kept their heads down. Nobody made eye contact in the hallway. The break room was silent at lunch. Not peaceful silent. Afraid silent. Like people were scared to talk because they didn't know who was listening. Kevin Brandt was the branch supervisor. He'd been there 6 years. Mid-40s, tall, broad shoulders, always wore expensive suits that seemed a size too small, like he wanted everyone to notice his build. He had a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows and a mahogany desk bigger than my first apartment's kitchen. The first time I met Kevin, he looked me up and down like I was a piece of furniture someone had delivered to the wrong address. He didn't shake my hand. He pointed at a desk in the middle of the open floor and said, "That's you. Don't touch anything you're not assigned to. Don't ask questions above your clearance, and don't waste my time." That was my welcome. I kept my head down for the first few weeks. I did my assigned work. I was thorough, fast, and accurate. I stayed late. I came in early. I watched everything. And what I saw made my stomach turn. Kevin ran that office like a feudal kingdom. He had favorites. People who laughed at his jokes, who agreed with everything he said, who brought him coffee without being asked. Those people got the good assignments, the bonuses, the praise. Everyone else got the scraps. And if you pushed back, if you questioned anything, you became a target. I saw it happen to a young analyst named Grace Nakamura. Brilliant woman, 26 years old, Northwestern graduate. She caught a discrepancy in a client's quarterly filing and brought it to Kevin's attention during a team meeting. She was professional about it, respectful. She even framed it as a question rather than an accusation. Kevin stared at her for about 5 seconds. Then he said, "Are you trying to do my job, Grace? Because if you want my chair, you better be ready to handle what comes with it." After that meeting, Grace's workload tripled. She was assigned to every dead-end project in the branch. Her access to key systems was quietly restricted. Within 3 months, she resigned. I watched her clean out her desk on a Friday afternoon. She didn't cry. She was past crying. She just looked hollow. Grace wasn't the only one. There was a pattern. Anyone who showed competence, anyone who got too close to the numbers Kevin didn't want examined, got pushed out, reassigned, overloaded, humiliated in meetings. The turnover reports I'd seen before coming in suddenly made perfect sense. Kevin wasn't just a bad manager. He was hiding something. Took me 4 months to figure out what it was. 4 months of staying late, of accidentally accessing files I wasn't supposed to see, of building relationships with the people in that office who were too beaten down to trust anyone, but were desperate enough to try. A woman named Patricia Okonkwo in accounts receivable was my breakthrough. She'd been there 8 years. Quiet, meticulous. She kept her head down better than anyone. But I noticed something. Every time Kevin's name came up in conversation, her jaw tightened. One evening, when the office was mostly empty, I sat down next to her in the break room. I didn't push. I just talked about my background, about Beaumont, about my parents, about what it felt like to work hard and feel invisible. And eventually Patricia started talking too. She told me about the client accounts, specifically a group of accounts that Kevin managed personally, accounts never assigned to anyone else, accounts that Patricia had noticed had irregular transaction patterns, but that she'd been explicitly told to never touch. "I brought it up once," Patricia said, staring into her coffee. 3 years ago. Kevin called me into his office, closed the door, and told me that if I ever mentioned those accounts again, he'd make sure I never worked in finance anywhere in this country. She believed him. And honestly, knowing what I knew about Kevin by then, I didn't blame her. I started digging into those accounts. Carefully. Slowly. I couldn't leave digital fingerprints. I couldn't access anything from my work terminal that would flag in the system. So I used old-fashioned methods. Paper trails. Physical files in the storage room on the 12th floor. Cross-referencing client names with public records. matching transaction dates with bank statements I pulled through channels Kevin didn't even know existed. What I found was systematic fraud. Kevin had been running a scheme for at least 4 years. He was creating phantom client accounts, routing real client funds through them, skimming fees and percentages, then covering the trail with falsified audit reports. The 3 auditors who had come through before me, Kevin had either charmed them, manipulated them, or fed them doctored numbers that looked clean on the surface. The total amount he'd siphoned was just under $4.7 million. I documented everything. Every transaction. Every fake account. Every falsified report. I built a case so airtight a first-year prosecutor could have won it in court. I compiled it into a 214-page audit report with supporting evidence, cross-references, and a timeline tracing every dollar Kevin had stolen. And then I called Jonathan. "It's worse than we thought," I told him. "I need you here. Personally." He flew in the next day. But here's the thing, I could have just sent the report. I could have had Jonathan handle it remotely. Legal could have swooped in, fired Kevin, started the process without me ever revealing who I was. But I didn't want that. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I wanted those people in that office, the ones Kevin had terrorized, belittled, broken down, I wanted them to see it. I wanted them to see that someone had been fighting for them, that their suffering hadn't gone unnoticed. And honestly, after 11 months of being called incompetent, of having my work dismissed, of being treated like I was nothing, I wanted Kevin to know exactly who he'd been mocking. The morning it happened started like any other. I got to the office at 7:45, made my coffee, sat at my desk, started working. Kevin came out of his office at 9:15. He was in a mood. I could tell because he was walking with that heavy stride he used when he wanted everyone to feel small. He stopped at my desk and picked up the stack of reports I'd been working on. "What is this?" he asked, flipping through the pages. "The quarterly reconciliation for the Westbrook account," I said. "You assigned it to me on Friday." He tossed the stack back on my desk, papers scattering. A few fell to the floor. "This is garbage," he said. "Absolute garbage. I've seen interns produce better work than this." I didn't respond. I just started picking up the papers. And that's when he decided to make it a show. "Hey everyone," Kevin called out, his voice carrying across the entire floor. People looked up from their desks, some reluctantly, some eagerly. The favorites, the ones who fed off his cruelty like entertainment. "I want everyone to take a good look at what happens when you hire someone who clearly lied on their resume." He turned back to me, and that's when he said it. "Pack your desk. You're absolutely useless." The smirks came. Tanya's hand went to her mouth. A guy named Reginald in the back actually leaned back in his chair like he was enjoying a movie. Kevin stood there, arms crossed, king of his little kingdom, untouchable. For about 30 more seconds, the glass door opened. Jonathan walked in. He moved through that office like he owned it. Because he did. He looked around the room, took in the scene, saw me standing at my desk with scattered papers at my feet, saw Kevin puffed up like a rooster, and he didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Honey," he said, looking directly at me with that calm, steady expression I'd fallen in love with over a decade ago. "Did you finish auditing this branch yet?" I reached into my bag and pulled out a flash drive. Every dollar, every fake account, every falsified report. 214 pages. "It's all here." Jonathan took the flash drive and looked at Kevin. And in that moment, watching the color drain from Kevin Brandt's face, watching his arms fall to his sides, watching his mouth open and close like a fish pulled out of water, I felt something I hadn't felt in 11 months. "Peace." "Kevin Brandt," Jonathan said, his voice measured and cold. "My name is Jonathan Mercer. I'm the majority shareholder of Holloway and Pierce Financial Group. And this woman you just called useless, she's not only my wife, she's the forensic auditor I personally assigned to investigate this branch. She has a CPA, an MBA from Rice University, and more professional integrity in her little finger than you've shown in your entire career." Kevin's face went from pale to gray. His lips moved but nothing came out. Jonathan continued. "Over the past 11 months, she has uncovered a systematic fraud scheme you've been operating for at least 4 years. Phantom accounts, skimmed funds, falsified audits. $4.7 million, Kevin. That's what you've stolen from this company and its clients. The office was so quiet I could hear the ventilation system humming. Legal is already involved. The SEC has been notified. And there are 2 federal investigators waiting for you downstairs in the lobby. Kevin tried to speak. You can't just. I can, Jonathan said. And I am. You're terminated, effective immediately. Your access has been revoked. Your personal attorney has already been contacted and informed of the charges. Kevin looked around the room, desperately searching for an ally, for someone to back him up, for one of his favorites to step forward. Nobody moved. Not Tanya. Not Reginald. Not a single person. The kingdom had fallen, and the subjects had no loyalty to a dethroned king. 2 security officers appeared at the door. Kevin was escorted out without another word. He didn't pack his desk. He wasn't given the chance. When the elevator doors closed behind him, the office exhaled. Literally. I could hear people releasing breaths they'd been holding for God knows how long. I stood at my desk, still surrounded by the papers Kevin had thrown, and then Patricia Okonkwo stood up from her desk across the room. She started walking toward me, and she started clapping. One person. Slow, deliberate claps. Then Grace Nakamura, who I'd called 2 days earlier and asked to come to the office that morning because she deserved to see this, stood up from the chair by the window where she'd been sitting quietly. She started clapping too. Then another person. And another. Within 30 seconds, the entire office was on their feet. People were clapping. Some were crying. A man named Douglas Chun, who'd been with the company for 12 years and had nearly quit 6 times, walked over and shook my hand with both of his. He couldn't even speak. He just nodded, eyes red. Jonathan addressed the office after things settled down. He told them the branch would be restructured, that a new leadership team would be brought in, that anyone who'd been mistreated, overlooked, or pushed out under Kevin's management would have their cases reviewed and their positions reconsidered. Grace Nakamura was offered her old position back with a promotion and back pay. She accepted on the spot. Patricia Okonkwo was promoted to Senior Accounts Manager, a position she should have held years ago. Douglas Chun was given the lead on the branch's largest client portfolio, something Kevin had deliberately kept from him for over 3 years. And me? I went home that night and sat on the couch with Jonathan. He handed me a glass of wine. We didn't talk for a while. We just sat there. You okay? He finally asked. Yeah, I said. I think I am. 11 months is a long time to let someone treat you like that. It was worth it, I said. Not for Kevin. For them. For Patricia, for Grace. For everyone in that office who thought nobody cared. Jonathan nodded. You know what your mother would say right now, right? I smiled. She'd say, baby, you did that just right. Now eat something. We both laughed. And for the first time in almost a year, the weight was gone. Kevin Brandt was formally charged with wire fraud, securities fraud, and embezzlement 4 months later. His trial lasted 3 weeks. He was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 14 years in federal prison. During the trial, it came out that he had been targeting and pushing out employees specifically because they were getting too close to his scheme. Grace, Patricia, Douglas, all of them had been threats to his operation, and he'd used his authority to neutralize them. The judge called it one of the most calculated, abusive power cases she'd seen in 20 years on the bench. I went back to Beaumont after the trial. Sat on my mother's porch. She handed me sweet tea and didn't ask questions. That was her way. She waited until I was ready to talk. Mama, I said. There were days in that office when I almost broke, when I almost told them who I was just to make it stop. She rocked in her chair and looked out at the yard. But you didn't. No, ma'am. You know why? Because you raised me better than that? She shook her head. Because you're stronger than whatever anybody else decides you are. Always have been. Since you were 6 years old doing multiplication at my kitchen table while your daddy was out on the road. You didn't need anybody's permission to be brilliant then, and you don't need it now. Cried on that porch. Not sad tears. Released tears. The kind that come when you've been holding yourself together so tight for so long that when you finally let go, everything just pours out. My father came outside a few minutes later. He sat down in the chair next to me, didn't say a word, and put his hand on mine. We sat there like that until the sun went down. A year later, I established the Caldwell Foundation. It's a nonprofit that provides legal resources, career counseling, and financial support to employees who've experienced workplace abuse and retaliation. We've helped over 300 people in our first 18 months, former employees who were wrongfully terminated, whistleblowers who were punished for doing the right thing, people like Grace and Patricia who had the courage to notice something wrong but didn't have the power to fight back alone. I named it Caldwell, not Mercer, because this work isn't about Jonathan's money or his name. It's about that little girl from Beaumont who learned at her mother's kitchen table that numbers don't lie, that hard work matters, and that the people who try to make you feel small are usually the ones with the most to hide. Kevin Brandt told me to pack my desk, told me I was useless, told an entire office full of people that I was nothing. I packed his entire operation into a 214-page report and handed it to the FBI. Some desks aren't meant to be packed. Some are meant to be the foundation you build a case on. And some people who look useless to the powerful are the most dangerous people in the room. Not because they fight back with noise, but because they fight back with the truth. And the truth, unlike power, unlike cruelty, unlike fear, the truth doesn't need a corner office or a mahogany desk. It just needs someone brave enough to find it,